Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining TAP series, the second edition of Talks on Architecture and Beyond. We are already in June, the last month of the second quarter of this 2021, and therefore we have a guest country session. This time we have invited Malaysia, Studio Bikin, that Jan will introduce in a while. But before moving on the content, and since we are in the equator of the year, I would like to dedicate a few minutes to summarize what TAP series has shared and the repercussion that we have achieved with this meaningful platform. So we start the year with the first session inviting Noche Web, a Singapore-based studio, and they share with us their design process and philosophy, but also explain about the heritage building conversion in the local landscape. In February, we invite DP Design and Mike Link, a very well-known for all of us. And in that talk, Mike enlightened us how to be passionate in designing for the users while maintaining respect for the space and environment. In March, guest country was Philippines, and as a star, we have architect William T. from WTA Design Studio. Architect William shared with us his motivation, ideas, and solutions through his projects that aim to encourage social connection and build a more welcoming community. A very touching talk. In April, we have the pleasure to have with us Panji Chen from Type Zero, also a studio based in Singapore. And he shared about that innovative concept of parametric phenomenology, a concept that unifies the dimensions of craft, technology, and culture context. With this talk, we learn a new design process that he normally practices. And last May, we had Alan Tay from Formware. Alan delighted us with his motivations on reinventing the existing to give form to the future through his designs. So with all this content and interesting sessions, we hope and we are sure that all the architecture and design community that has been with us during these months has enhanced their knowledge on the topics discussed under the title of The Making of Architecture. Because at Cosentino, as one of the global leaders manufacturing innovative surface for the architecture and design industry, does have the responsibility as well to promote knowledge and education. And this platform is meant to be for that. And of course, these social actions like TAP series have an impact in the community. For instance, this month, the magazine D+A has dedicated an article to the TAP series, featuring and praising all these first-class professionals that have been participating until now in the tab. And of course, celebrating Cosentino and Jan Folling, the curator, for the impact that this platform is generating. So let me invite Jan. Good evening, Jan.
Good evening, Maria.
Have you seen the Plus A issue this month?
I have not seen it yet, but I know what is inside, and I'm very excited to look at it and to read the articles.
Yes, and actually, Jan, we feel very proud about what we have achieved, and this is just the beginning. So thank you for doing this tab even more meaningful and reliable with you. And I still remember those days in November 2018, trying to give birth the tab series 2019. So yeah, we feel very proud of this platform. Jan, I think it's time to start. I think our guests, our distinguished guests this month are waiting for us. So all is yours.
So thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone for being here. It is a little bit unconventional that I am sitting right now in the middle of the city center. You might be hearing a bit of noise around me. There's some work ongoing at the Asian Civilization Museum, and so I am right in the city center of Singapore to celebrate the built environment from the Victoria Theatre that I am seeing all the way to the CBD behind me. And we are celebrating today again, the built environment and the making of architecture. Like this year, we are looking into how practitioners are developing their architecture, their design thinking, and the slow pace of architecture, and more importantly, to see how human beings can inhabit all of these spaces. And in this, for today, we are inviting Malaysia. And when I think of Malaysia and when I think of architects from Malaysia, there was, with no hesitation, it was Studio Bikin. Studio Bikin, I would say, can be understood as the rising star of architects in Malaysia. And what the main core of their practice is very close to my heart as well, with their approach to space, to materiality, to storytelling, in all of the elements that Adela and Farah are creating. So I'm very honored that they said yes to join today and to give a talk to our worldwide audience. And so I'm very much looking forward to it. And I haven't seen yet the presentation, Spatial narratives. And so stay tuned, because I will be asking many questions after that, and feel free to send questions as well on the platform for our speakers. So thanks again for being here today. It's a pleasure to be outside in Singapore for a while. I wish I could be with Farah and Adela. So the floor is yours. I can't wait to see it. Go for it.
Thank you, Jan, for the very generous introduction, and thank you, Maria, for the opportunity for us to speak today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Such a glowing introduction. So I guess without further ado, I'll share my screen and we'll get going. Okay. Okay, can you see? All right. So, yep.
We'll just give you guys a little bit of an introduction to our practice that both myself and Adela started in 2012 from our very humble home here based in Bangsa, my home actually. And we started as a two-person practice, and we slowly grew to one person, Jisin, who is our senior designer, who is still currently with us. Thankfully, she survived almost 10 years of ordeal with us. And as our experience and our capacity grew through the opportunities we have we decided to leave this humble abode and move to another location based in Bangsa as well, in 2015 on Jalan Kemuja, in a charming 1950s shop house. Here we did some small renovations to an existing old shop house and converted a small space at the back into our office, which we enjoyed working and being inspired in for about 2 years, when an opportunity came to further expand and have our own space, which is further down the road. Adela, if you can move to the next slide. Yes, so we moved from this building that you see, this tall one on the right, to the other tall one on the left here. Because at that same time, we started a subsidiary arm of our company called Kedai Bikin, where we make and design furniture, working very, very closely with local craftsmen to design and fabricate furniture that's inspired by the tropics and the utilitarian design and some of the very, very familiar furniture pieces that we all grew up and came to know and love. For us, craft is almost like an approach and attitude to design. So these are the members of our office right now that we have been communicating on Zoom for the past 1.5 years.
Yeah, it's the most current photo of us.
And we're very happy that they're still here supporting us. To begin with, we take inspiration from obviously our own locality, the area where we grow up in, Malaysia, the tropics. We are inspired by obviously the natural landscape, our local culture. Also, obviously, for us at least, the utilitarian design principles advocated by the EAMS, complemented by the contextual design of Jeffrey Bawa as one of our main influences. And also, the really, really simple houses that is atypical of Southeast Asian architecture, that emphasizes on very, very basic principles for design. One of them being bringing in as much natural light into the spaces as possible when required. Also promoting cross ventilation as much as possible. And then deep overhanging eaves to shade from our weather extremities of the sun and the rain, and then also to screen from the glare of the sun. So these sort of like 4 principles is something that we, for the most part, adopt in our design approach.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. And I'd just like to mention how honored we are to sort of share a little bit about our thought process and some of our projects with you guys out there. This simple diagram we just came up with retrospectively that seeks to sort of summarize the various issues we consider as part of our design process. I think it all starts with the client's brief whenever we we get approached for a new project. Appraising the client's brief leads to the sort of narrative of the project, which takes into consideration the situation, purpose, the issues, and the various needs of the client. Thereafter, we're able to sort of process all that, and this leads us to consider other elements such as climate, the immediate physical context of the site, economy, budget, buildability, sustainability as well. And what we mean by sustainability is not so much in terms of, green building index, but it's also how the building might wear over the years. How can a building be maintained by the client over the years, and things like that. And finally, this process allows us to sort of absorb and process the information to come up with a design solution for the projects. Over the years, we have somewhat sort of organically landed ourselves with a few projects which deals with existing buildings. In this process, we have learned a lot about the sort of transformational possibilities of existing buildings and structures. And we've taken on this kind of restorative approach within the industry. Whilst we're not really averse to new builds at all, we also realize how this approach is becoming more important in Southeast Asia, where generally speaking, shiny new buildings take precedence over rejuvenation of existing urban fabric. In order for us to sort of facilitate that as well, the diagram on the right sort of shows how important it is for us to have a very strong collaborative relationship with the builder and the client in order to sort of build within that context of rejuvenating existing buildings. So yeah, carry on.
Oh yeah, so I'm just going to make a quick introduction on the two projects that we're presenting today, which was coincidentally led by Adela. One is the Jalutong House, which is an architectural-driven project that demonstrates that with careful planning and consideration, a seamless transition between the new and old can be achieved. And in this case, this is for a private residence. And then the second would be Nico Nico Cafe. It is a small cafe, which is an interior-driven project that takes a more refrained approach, something that's also quite new for us as a practice. And we were very, very glad for this opportunity to experiment by that using a more pared down and a refrained approach to design can yield a more meaningful impact to the space. We're happy to be able to share these two projects, one that was completed in 2017 and one which was recently completed in 2020 with you guys this evening. So enjoy.
Okay. Thank you, Farah. The first project is actually an interesting one from the narrative perspective. The client approached us, she being the youngest daughter, who has lived with her mother in their family home over a number of years, and was expecting her first child. And so would like to sort of carve out a dwelling space for her own family within the premises. The original building is actually quite a sort of handsome, rationalized kind of piece of architecture. It's a solid combination of like load-bearing brick walls and within an RC structure. And it has a very strong sort of characteristic to it, which we are happy to maintain. And a little bit about the story behind the building. The client's late father was also a QS, and this house was actually built by him with an engineer friend and an architect friend, Bernard Orr. And this was built together, three of them as a series of little sort of bungalow developments along the street. in the early 70s. Hence, it's understandable that the client would like to maintain the features of the original house as much as possible and create an extension to sort of accommodate the daughter's request. So the design process began with obviously consultation with mother and daughter. And this kind of summarizes, you know, the kind of concerns that we had to address. It involved absorbing various requirements from both mother and daughter, which informed eventually the sort of narrative of the design. This summarizes some of the issues we addressed with the clients before arriving at the proposal. You know, they were both concerned about family and prioritized conviviality, communal needs, pastoral care. The mother was more concerned about security, company, whereas the daughter was more concerned on privacy and the sort of expanding family in the future. So through this process of kind of negotiating both the connections and the boundaries, we kind of like arrived at a more detailed brief for the project. So actually running through the layout of the existing building, this is the driveway, and you know, you kind of enter through this step up. It's kind of like a slightly sloped site. And this is a kind of entrance patio with a small sort of landscape area. And you enter through this sort of generous entrance foyer that actually has a bar in this corner, typical 70s bar that hasn't changed over the years. And this serves also as an informal living room lounge. And from that space, you can either turn left into the living space in blue or right into the dining space, and all the yellow areas are sort of back of house kitchen area. From the dining space, you can also come back out into a second patio, but one that has hardly been used over the years by the mother and the rest of the family. On the first floor, this is the main staircase that leads up to the hallway. It's very efficiently designed. The hallway, as well as the entrance foyer, overlooks the kind of courtyard. We call it the bamboo courtyard because it has a kind of interesting collection of bamboo and kind of like a rock landscape that the client would like to maintain as well. And that sort of provides light and air to the rear bedrooms here. So as you can see, the layout of the existing house is a pretty good one. And you can see how the kind of planes of brick walls, the load-bearing brick walls, juxtaposed against the kind of regular sort of RC frame within the building. So because of the site constraints, the most logical area where we could actually create some kind of extension to accommodate the daughter's requirements is actually towards the front. And since this patio is not very much utilized, it made sense for us to kind of reach out towards the garden. There is an existing large tree in front here that has been there for years, I think since her childhood. And we thought it would be quite nice to sort of allow this extension towards this tree, which is quite a feature within the front garden. Okay, so the final proposal, after a couple of iterations, which I don't think we have time to share, unfortunately, because I think most of the iterations were sort of involving the same kind of volume of extension. It was more about negotiating the kind of thresholds and boundaries and what spaces would be able to sit, further out towards the garden and closer towards the existing house that worked. So here, looking at the ground floor, you have these spaces, and the yellow sort of shaded space represents parts of the old house that has been kind of carved out to be included into the daughter's space, whereas the orange areas are the kind of physical, the sort of physical extension, as it were, of the proposal. And now we have a kind of yellow arrow, which represents the daughter's private entrance and the kind of movement between her domain and the mother's domain. And it also coincides with kind of red line where the kind of new physical extension starts. When we look at the first floor, this bedroom too has always been the daughter's bedroom. So it was agreed that she would carve this out as part of her kind of domain as well, her private domain, with the connecting bathroom. And here we have a new bathroom set within this space. And the third bedroom, after some negotiation with the siblings, this would be turned into a nursery that would be part of the daughter's domain as well. So the orange area here shows the kind of extent of building works that reflects the kind of like new physical addition to the existing house. Obviously, there's some reconfiguration of this space to allow for the new bathroom. And the yellow arrows actually indicate how daughter can move seamlessly between her domain and the main house, via the nursery or via her bedroom. And we provided this link between her private sort of patio, her bedroom patio, and the new extension, so that there's a kind of like loop in terms of circulation within her own space. Because the wing itself has to be quite narrow in order for us to keep to the original sort of width of the patio. That was a conscious decision we made from early on. We had to sort of allow enough light, ceiling space, and the kind of circulation space to provide the kind of illusion of a larger space to move around within. So the design process basically also allowed us to kind of question in terms of the construction sort of approach as well. How are we to sort of accommodate or pay respect to the sort of original architecture of the building, which we actually like. We felt that it was actually important for the roof to sort of splay out towards the garden and that tree that we mentioned earlier. And also to provide a kind of illusion of a bigger space by allowing more light in. That sort of complements the rest of the existing house, which has kind of like shorter roofs going the other direction. So we have this kind of butterfly roof effect that also actually accentuates the sort of threshold between the old here and the new. So the threshold physically is actually dealt with like by introducing like a large sort of concrete gutter here that takes in like the water from the new and the old roof. In terms of the architectural language, we felt that it was sort of like taking cue from the old house. We decided to sort of express the main spaces that we had to sort of increase in width within the annex block by sort of introducing a series of projecting sort of brick planes within this facade. So that simultaneously provides privacy to the daughter, as well as sort of means of ventilating from the sides. So this is the roof plan that shows the threshold between the existing and the new on the right. As you can see, so the projecting bits are actually projecting from a lower level. And this is actually, this is the threshold on the ground floor between the main house and the annex on the right. And okay, so now we're showing you some images of the process of constructing this. It was quite interesting, and actually in negotiating these thresholds, both figuratively, you know, contextually and in construction as well, required really sound communication between us and the engineers and the builders. So this this is the threshold, and we actually had to like remove the old sort of patio structure here in order to stitch the new RC structure to the old. This is the progress from the neighbor's side of the new wing coming up, and you can see this is like the bathroom projecting sort of wall with side sort of windows to allow for cross ventilation. And this is another image. This is before, as the sort of footings were cast, and this is as the concrete structure and the roof structure is coming up. And this is like a checkpoint view when the kind of the main sort of brick panel here has been built to sort of, it's actually quite a useful photo for us to sort of review how the kind of annex is kind of communicating with the old building, you know, because that was quite important for us. And this is the side, development of the side. And we have one projecting space here. This is the study. Okay, so again, physically, this is the ground floor photo from the sort of the main house entrance foyer looking towards the dining. And this is the threshold that I mentioned earlier between the main house and the annex, the mother and the daughter. And this is how it progressed on site. And this threshold is marked by a series of sliding doors that allowed you to sort of completely open up the space for kind of communal gatherings that, you know, could happen from time to time. And this is a close-up of that threshold in terms of its physical manifestation in the form of this gutter between the old roof and the new. And that's where a lot of water is coming down, which is taken by this kind of gargoyle here that brings the water right down. And these are some views of the built project from the street. Here, from the other direction, from the neighbor's side, as you can see, east-facing facade, get some direct sunlight into the stairwell. The rest are actually more clear story windows and cross ventilation along these
I think another thing that was quite unexpected for us was that when this building was built, and because you know, on the first floor in this picture, you kind of almost see directly into this tree, kind of almost giving this illusion of you sort of like being in a tree house, because you're in quite close relation with the thing that you kind of treasure most in the garden. So for that, you know, the owner was quite happy with that, being able to make that kind of connection with something that she kind of grew up with, and being able to kind of be at almost like in a different plane of appreciating that tree from the top of the building, which was quite nice.
Yeah, yeah. And this is actually a similar view to the kind of checkpoint image I sort of showed you earlier. And we're quite happy that, you know, there is kind of like positive relationship between the old and the new. We feel that that's the sort of strength of the project, and the most difficult part of the project as well, throughout the not so much the design, but also the sort of construction part of it. So these are more close-ups. We were testing lights then. These are a series of views looking at this bridge that links between the daughter's annex back into her sort of bedroom patio. And this actually is showing her entrance door. And you come in and you can go straight up to the first floor or turn left into the living cum dining that leads back into the mother's house and right to the kitchen. And this is a view from this sort of sitting area looking out, and you can see glimpses of the bedroom patio, as well as the wall, that sort of thin brick wall that sort of separates this area from the car porch. This is a series of views looking through this threshold into the daughter's space, the annex space. As you move through this space, you arrive, you know, the staircase takes you up, and beyond that is the kitchen. And this is the same space taken from further in during the morning, I think about 9 o'clock in the morning. So it gets quite good morning light from the left. Similar views in the morning from the other side. And the staircase, we wanted the staircase to be as light as possible, but also the criteria was for it to be child-friendly. So we wanted it to float within the space because the space was already quite narrow. So we came up with this kind of like welded sort of perforated steel plates that kind of like held each other up to form this kind of matrix that was structurally, feasible after consultation with the engineer as well as the builder, the steel specialist. Okay, so next project, Nico Neko, which is quite different, as Farah had mentioned earlier. This was led by our interior designer, Tia Ahmad. Basically, Nico Neko is like a Malaysian brand that crafts a series of matcha products that has become very popular over the last few years. And we were approached to design an extension to their sort of flagship boutique store cum mini cafe that could then seat very, very few customers. Their products are actually sold in supermarkets and all that, and they've just started to sort of have dine-in matchas as well. So the current building here, this is actually their current space in front of a shop house. And you need to sort of go up to the first floor and go through a series of doors here. So that the rear space, it was occupied by a plant shop. They were going to sort of take over this plant shop space. This is a view that shows the previous gallery where the products are displayed, and there's like a tiny bar on the left. So as you can see, it's quite tight. And here, this shows the kind of previous space they had, and the kind of proposal for the new cafe. I think the objective was the client needed a space where customers could have a kind of dine-in experience that is in keeping with their brand. Nico Neko prides themselves to be uncommon. And although the origins of the matcha is Japanese, it was not necessarily a look that they kind of aspired to have. This we learned along the process of design. So in terms of references, we looked at sort of cubic forms and a very light palette for inspiration due to the small space, and actually the previous space was also, the gallery had a kind of cubic sort of very minimal means of displaying their products, and they wanted to sort of retain that spirit into the cafe space. So, so the key, the two sort of main things that changed in terms of how you approach this new space is actually the entryway. I think, sort of entering the cafe from here allowed a kind of view into this larger space that, this needed to sort of be enlarged. Obviously this needed to be tidied up so, you don't see doors. They needed a kind of new counter space, which was tucked in this corner. So it became a kind of focal point at the end of the cafe with the kind of back of house could tap into there. But what was important was actually creating this kind of visual connection between the cafe and the original sort of Nico Neko 1.0, which is their flagship sort of gallery here. So an opening was planned between the new cafe and the gallery. We're just showing some like earlier iterations just to sort of demonstrate the kind of process that we went through. Initial approach was to kind of allow a very informal sort of standing, sitting, kind of play of scale, whether it's kind of like a chair, sort of seat height or table height, more of a kind of sort of horizontal sort of table chairscape. And very planar. But as we continued along with the project, we actually realized that it required more restraint in order for us to sort of be able to tie back to the original gallery space, that kind of spirit of it for this cafe. At the same time, the client wanted to sort of reiterate some kind of paper installation, some kind of installation on the ceiling. The original cafe had a kind of paper installation as part of the ceiling, but we couldn't sort of continue that into the space for some reasons, and we sort of proposed these two alternatives instead. And this is kind of Oculus we initially proposed between the cafe and the gallery. And these are the kind of final sort of two explorations in terms of the installations that we could carry out within the final sort of layout. What we realized actually when we were working through this layout was the more we edited the elements down to its bare essentials, the more focused it was on the experience of the space and the matcha at hand. Okay, so a little bit about the construction bit. Buildability. Of course, it requires some experimentation on site. Builders have to be a bit patient with us sometimes. This is like the process of actually testing out the concrete bench on site. That had to be recast and the details worked out, I think, once or twice. And we wanted to, well, Tia had this great idea of actually kind of breaking the top that sort of supported the tables. But that required some, testing on site to see where do you stop sort of putting the rebars and how do you sort of creatively kind of break it on site. And that took, I think, a few rounds of mock-ups. And this is actually the paper installation. The artists, Sarah Rahman and Shagaz, they came up with like a mock-up scale, mock-up to a scale of 1 to 100, which was immediately approved by the client. And they carried out something that was actually very similar to their mock-up. Yeah, so this is a view back to the gallery with some very sort of minimal modifications to, the shelving and just the spruce up really. And you can see the original paper installation on the ceiling and the view out onto the street. And this is a view of the original gallery, looking back towards the cafe. I mean, looking into the new cafe, really. And this is a view of the completed product. Some views of the bar. And this is a view of the main, one of the sort of dining niches on the right as you come in. Actually the kind of absolute sort of bare minimum sort of quality of the space allowed you to really sort of focus on the matcha and the kind of details that you're surrounded in. And of course, the view via this opening created that sort of poetic experience that we didn't actually imagine would be sort of possible from within such a small space. Yeah. So less is more sometimes. So that's it from us, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adela. Thank you, Farah. I was just like listening and taking notes, and thank you for bringing us through your design journey. It was a pleasure to see, and we could have looked at one more project and another one again and again. So thank you so much for bringing through all of these processes. I have, of course, many questions, but the first one that comes to my mind, it is the level of experimentation that you are doing, especially in the last project, where we can see that you did some design iteration, yes, but the experimentation on site, the trial and error, is it something that is part of your practice? breaking something and then finding beauty in the breaking of something, that it is becoming part of the design. So how it is in your practice, do you do this high level of experimentation, and especially on site with the contractors?
Oh, that it happens very often.
A lot.
That's what I'm asking.
It was actually a driving, well, at least when we first started, it was a driving element to our practice. I mean, I think it started with this whole sort of like, it's not so much rebelling against the system, but I think it's this need for thinking outside the box, you know, because when we started the practice, we had just come out from our previous practices where we had this real sort of like honest desire to kind of break out from the mold that in which we were practicing in, and push the boundaries and envelope of experimentation further. And of course, you know, we paid a lot of attention, detail to how materials are put together. And that required us to kind of experiment. And we used our first office, which is my house, as a starting point to create those experiments and those, you know, because if it fails, it's okay, because I live here, you know. But, you know, so things like, you know, when it comes to sort of like reusing, repurposing materials, there was plenty to work from, and from there we started to gain confidence within ourselves, and also we were able to demonstrate with some clients who are willing to kind of take this risk with us, to kind of push a little bit further in our design exploration. So it is dependent on the project, and depending between the level of trust we have between the client and the dynamics we have between the client as well. To how far we can push a certain envelope. But trust is key, essentially, trust within ourselves, and
Yes.
the trust that we build between us and the client.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
obviously it can't apply to every project, but yeah, so you know, smaller boutique projects are more likely to enable this kind of level of experimentation. Yeah.
And in this level of experimentation, there is a strong side on the materiality. For example, in the first project that you shared, the existing architecture has already quite a strong soul by its shape, by its material, and then you successfully inserted a new identity as well. And the threshold that you have identified was very, very key in the negotiation of this success. How did you inserted this new material? How did you make the choices of the materiality of the new extension to ensure that it marries very well with the existing? How was this negotiation on the materiality?
I think it sort of started with kind of the structural base, and we wanted to create this kind of, because the original house had a lot of quite deep but elegant beams, concrete beams, and we consciously wanted to sort of create these fins that we felt would be good in concrete as well, as a kind of main bones of the annex extension. And between these sort of concrete fins, we would start, we developed a series of brick sort of panels, or sort of, you know, like projecting sort of planes that was also kind of like taking cue from the original house. And I guess the bits in betweens were basically just, you know, fairly sort of standard means of pulling it together, you know. There was a sort of steel structure that sat on the sort of concrete columns, those fins, you know, that eventually held the windows and the roof structure. So it was a kind of hybrid sort of, you know, construction approach to that. But, you know, taking cue from, you know, this kind of planar solids that you kind of get from the original building. That drove the kind of sort of construction approach.
Yeah. And in this, what I appreciated in the two projects, and so from this materiality, exploration, you tend to frame the spaces, to frame the views. And it is something that we can find in your other project as well, and that we could see in some of the pictures of the house, where you are standing in a new extension, looking towards the existing house and the journey from one side to another. Is it again something that it is recurrent in your practice to always, maybe not always, but to frame the spaces and to frame the views in a very strong composition?
Maybe subconsciously we do it, but I think we sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's unconscious. Yeah, but I think I actually, it was really funny because when you gave the title of our talk, Spatial Narratives, we kind of both felt quite an affinity to it, because between ourselves, we always felt one of the main driving sort of like key to our planning is actually spatial planning. We place a really important emphasis on that, essentially the flow of the space. So the planning of our project takes precedence over everything. So like we kind of almost close our eyes and visualize before we even kind of sit down to kind of draw. And that's why, like, context, I mean, the context in which we build, whether it is in a residential situation or a small to medium commercial situation, it is really important for us to kind of get down to site to really actually have a feel of the site and the move and move through the site before we even start to kind of conceptualize anything, because it really does inform the flow of the space. It's almost like the architectural. I mean, it's not so much feng shui, but then there is some kind of energetic. Yeah, it is an intuitive and energetic flow into the space that we kind of try to bring into our drawings when we and the way we plan things. We actually have to feel it first before we draw it.
Yeah, and in this, when you talk about the way that you are designing, I will have a bigger question, because you started your talk by going back to the origin. The kampung house, for example, the wind, opening the space, cross ventilation, and the house that you shared is exactly representing all of that. Large roof eave, fully open, cross ventilation. Can we say that your architecture and the way that you design is highly embedded in the context of Southeast Asia, that is corresponding to the tropical environments? Because that's what I feel.
Yeah. I mean, to us that's obvious.
Yeah, but it is not necessarily obvious.
Yeah, I know. But you see, to us it's like common sense, because why do you want to reinvent something that has been thought through, experimented on, and proven to work by all our ancestors over hundreds of years? There must be a reason why the kampung house looks like that. And the main reason is because it works, and there are all the specific reasons. Now we can actually theorize it and, sort of bring it down to sort of, large eaves, screens, brise soleil, cross ventilation, etc. So there's a certain amount of respect we have for that knowledge, and it makes sense.
But I think it is important. You said it all. It makes sense.
Yeah. It's common sense.
And that's a big learning lesson for many architects around the region, younger generation as well, that we shall not forget our roots and how architecture that has been utilized and developed for centuries is still highly relevant today, even though we are living in high-density cities. And that leads me to another question, is that how do you negotiate high-density living? I'm sure that you might have been doing some project in high-dense areas. How can you bring this idea of tropical environment and open buildings into a high-dense area? How do you do that?
I think Singapore has got some pretty good examples of how you can marry architecture with landscape. Mm-hmm. And I feel that if you're looking at sort of higher density buildings, I think this is one way of looking into it, because what we forget is when you're in a sort of dense environment, the air is different from when you're in a sort of private detached residence, because you can buffer yourself with this garden, with plants and all that to sort of give yourself shade and oxygen levels. So I think landscape, greenery is important. Mm-hmm. Farah, do you have any other thoughts on it?
I think maybe I also feel that I think the other thing is that a consideration for as we the heat gain living in a high density area is also tremendous, and I think maybe a consideration in the way we approach our building materials as well, because a lot of a high concentration of buildings that are built within, say, like the urban fabric, it baffles me that we're still building a lot of skyscrapers with a lot of glazing, especially in KL. I think there is a shift in Singapore in the way people are building in Singapore, perhaps, you see more examples like Adela said, but I mean, in Kuala Lumpur, especially with all of these mega developments that are being built right now, there is still so much glazing being used in all of these developments. And I think the way we kind of plan the skeleton of these buildings as well, and the way we, from the foundational level, like the skeleton.
Yeah, the skin of the building is actually very important, So
and
heat gain.
And in this, again, you touched a very important point that is rarely discussed in Southeast Asia, which is circularity in the built environment. You talked about the linear development and circular building, circular architecture. Yes. Is it something that you are trying to promote, to convince, and so to really make like the future of our built environment something that is highly circular, with material that can be re-employed, reused, and even structure? You talk about the skeleton. How can we reuse the structure of a building into different uses? So is it something that you are trying to promote in your architecture?
I don't think consciously. We feel that it's kind of like it's become a more important part of what we feel is like our kind of duty in a way. Our responsibility to be aware of what's happening around us. And some recent experiences the last 1 or 2 years made me realize, because sometimes we're just too busy and we're not sort of in touch with the kind of local industry as much. But I was actually rather shocked by how little awareness Malaysians generally have, even within the construction industry, of issues of climate change, and how much the construction industry is very much part of it. So with that realization, I felt that it's quite important for us to at least be aware and approach each project with this kind of with this in mind.
Yeah. You wanted to say something, Farah?
No, actually, I was gonna say that we're not anti new projects, but I think even we,
no, we like new.
we're even if we were given a
It's
clean,
easier.
even if we were given a clean slate, I think the way we would try to approach it would be from an angle that would be sensitive to the context, and then also I think its current needs, and not to say we are not sort of like Greenpeace for architecture, but I think we can already work in the planning of the project itself. We can find ways to save and be creative, and I think throughout the whole journey. I think, but somehow along the way we have been somewhat. We've somehow naturally been given the opportunity to work with existing places, and it's only through those opportunities that we are able to demonstrate what we kind of eventually advocate. Because we have found ways to work within the boundaries and the parameters that each existing building presents us, and building that sort of like relationship between and negotiating between the old and new, the past and the present, I think forces us to be more sensitive naturally on how we can respond, whether is it to contrast or to respect, to preserve or to demolish, the degree of that, so that we can create this sort of like interesting interface, and I think it yields a more like, I don't know, a building that has an inherent soul that you can feel immediately when you kind of arrive.
I think that's important, and I think I'm mindful of the time, and we are reaching the end of the talk. But in terms of conclusion, it is something that is very important to remind the soul of a building and the feeling that you have when you enter the building, and that you can feel the soul of the building.
Or even the site. Even if it's a new site.
Even if it is a new site. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but Studio Bikin means making, isn't it? Yeah. Bahasa Melayu, maksudnya, like
it's more
make.
colloquial actually. Most refined Malays will not use the word Bikin. It's like a workman's language.
Okay.
Like contractors.
Contractors use the word.
Yeah. So once again, I would like to thank you so much for sharing all of the insight of what is Studio Bikin, the project that you are doing, the vision that you have for the built environment and our region. I would like to see more of what you are making, what you are doing, what you are creating, your contribution to the built environment in Malaysia and hopefully the rest of the region. So once again, thank you so much, Adela. Thank you so much, Farah. It was a pleasure to have you with us here in Singapore, a little bit around me like this. And so I will just conclude. So thanks again, everyone, for being here today. It was the last talk of the second quarter, and so next month we'll have a new talk, and we are embarking on a new quarter as well, and a new approach to architecture with other architects. So thanks again, everyone, and I hope that I will be able to see everyone in the real life and no longer online. Let's hope for the best. Stay safe, stay healthy. All the best, Farah and Adela in Malaysia. We understand the situation that is happening there, so we are with you, and we wish you all the best. Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan and Maria, for inviting us. It's been a pleasure on our part as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Maria, for this opportunity to share.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and see you next month, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.